Hi everyone, this is OCD Live. I'm Mally Agreement, and let's get to some questions. So the first question I have, and it's not really a question, it's more like a statement, but the person says, "Hi Ali, I would also beg to differ that people who are stuck with one theme or one thought have more severe OCD, because if we put it in another perspective, people with multiple themes have multiple issues to deal with, as opposed to someone who's focused on one theme." I agree with the rest of your videos though. So I think that really it's not so much about the number of themes, but the overall level of anxiety. If you're dealing with one theme, but the level of anxiety is 10 out of 10, it's a lot worse than dealing with multiple themes at a level of anxiety of like 6 out of 10, for example, right? But if your level of anxiety for multiple themes is 10 out of 10 as well, then it's just as hard. So I think it's really how crippling that anxiety is. And you know what to do. You just basically, at least you know what your theme is. So anything to do with your theme, you have to disregard. If it has to do with this topic, I'm not paying attention to it. And it doesn't matter how much anxiety it gives you, how much feelings, how real it feels, all this stuff. It doesn't matter. It has to do with your theme. It's OCD. You're moving on. So, but yeah, it depends also person to person as well. But I find that generally pretty much everybody suffers the same way. So next question I have is, "Hi Ali, I have a few questions. Can you please talk about ERP, mostly imaginary exposure for harm OCD? I've seen a lot of videos where therapists say it's a gold standard therapy for OCD. What do you think about it? Could it make the recovery process faster, and have you tried it?" Okay, and there's more, there's a second question to it, but I'm going to answer this one first, and then we'll go on to the second one. So I've talked to a lot of people who did ERP as an imaginary exposure for harm OCD, and for different types of OCD, but because I talk to mostly to people who have harm OCD, just because it's just a larger percentage, I have a lot of experience with the imaginary exposure technique. And I can tell you, honestly, it's not very effective. And the reason why it's not very effective is because, say, for example, the person is afraid that what if they were driving and they killed somebody? Well, they can imagine it all day long, but they know that they're imagining it. You know what I mean? It's not the same thing as actually, going for a ride and having the experience of, oh my God, what if something happened, and having that real OCD experience. Do you know what I mean? This is just imaginary, so the anxiety doesn't go up. And if the anxiety doesn't go up, then there's no what you can't prevent the response, because ERP is exposure and response prevention. So you have to expose yourself to the situation and prevent the response of fear. Right? If the anxiety is not going up, then it doesn't really work. In terms of, is it helpful? Does it speed up the process? It definitely will not hurt the process. So I would say try it for yourself and see if it works. Because for some things it might work. Especially if you're in a situation where you're doing a lot of avoidance, that you're so scared to even think about a certain topic. In that way, exposure does work, imaginary exposure, because you're forcing yourself to face the situation, right? But it really kind of depends. If it's just, say like a straightforward driving OCD where you think you've hurt somebody, or some sort of a false memory OCD where you think you've hurt somebody, I don't find it to be too effective. Okay, so I'm continuing with the question. Can you please also explain why harm OCD against others and ourselves many times makes us think that we are feeling urges to act on our violent thoughts? Are these urges just fear plus imagination or anxiety, or maybe just urges to check? Are these urges real urges, if you know what I mean? That's probably the only thing I still can't understand about harm OCD, and something that makes my recovery difficult. Thank you. Have a good week. So with harm OCD, you have to understand, this is not different than any other type of OCD. It's a thought that came into your mind. It happened to be about harm OCD. It could have been about, I don't know, religious OCD or cleaning OCD or whatever, right? Happened to be about harm OCD. It got stuck. And it got stuck because you reacted with a lot of fear the first time you got it, right? So then it came back again and again and again and again. So But as it kept getting more and more stuck in your mind started to be convinced that the situation is actually dangerous and the thought is actually real in terms of it can actually hurt you. So when that happens, what the mind does is it starts to send you feelings as if the thought is real. So with harm OCD, what it will do is it will send you urges as if the thought is real. It will send you feelings of guilt as if the thought is real. So all of this is very normal kind of situation. There's nothing abnormal about it in terms of it being OCD. This is how OCD goes. So I would say you have to label the urges as part of feelings. So I'm getting these feelings, they feel real or almost real, or sometimes like at 10 out of 10 they can feel very, very real, and then as you go down in anxiety it starts to feel kind of less real because you're losing that connection. Like the brain is actually starting to figure out that this is just OCD. So but it can feel very real, and you can feel urges or different types of OCD people feel even physical sensations, right? So because it's your mind controlling your entire body, right? So it's fine to feel that way, but it's not okay to react, right? So view it as part of the exposure. So you're exposing yourself to the thought, but you're not going to react to the thought. So yes, I'm feeling the urges. Yes, I'm feeling guilty. Yes, I'm feeling um whatever, like I'm feeling like it could actually happen or whatever, right? But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to react anymore, because the more you react, the more this will continue. And as you stop your reaction, what's going to happen is those urges will start to go away, because they're not actually true urges. It's just your brain trying to mimic a situation, because again, your brain is convinced that the thought is real. And because your brain is convinced to a certain extent, right, that the thought is real, that it sends you those feelings. So as you pull away, those feelings will go away naturally because they have no merit in terms of real life. So another comment I got is a psychiatrist recently put me on clomiphene and or slash anafranil. I don't know if the person means both or one of the two. Um, and the person says it made me feel terrible. Think twice before you take this rat poison. And guys, I think it's important for me to read this comment, because it's you have to kind of watch out for yourself here. Because a person is wearing a white coat and they have a degree and they're prescribing something to you, it doesn't automatically mean that it is good, it is right for you to take, and you should definitely right away start taking it. I've seen people recover from very severe OCD without any medication. Actually, I see it most of the time, right? I also seen people recover with medication. So if you feel like you need it, you can take it. I wouldn't take this though, because obviously, right? But do your research on the side effects. Not ask your doctor to do the research. You do your own research, Google it, try to figure out what the consequences could be, because I've had consequences from taking medication. So did other people that I've talked to. And some people have no consequences. So, you have to be kind of your own, not your own doctor, but, kind of think for yourself, because the doctors, they're just like, a lot of the times they're just writing, they're like, oh yeah, take it. They don't feel that responsibility a lot of the times that frankly they really should feel. But they're people just like us, right? So it's don't think that they are something special just because they went through 5 years of schooling or 6 years of schooling to become a doctor. It's not that special, trust me when I say. So think for yourself when you're taking medication. Does medication help OCD? And I have different videos on this as well. It will calm you down a little bit more. Will it take the thoughts away? No, I don't find that it takes the thoughts away. Maybe in like 1% of the population it does. But really, I find there's a difference between like other mental issues versus OCD. And again, I know a lot about OCD. I'm not skilled with other mental issues, okay? So, but I find that logically speaking, if you are generally an anxious person medication can help you calm you down if it's just general. If you're worried about a particular problem, say for example, you're worried, what if I harmed somebody, right? Well, that's a very specific thought. And it's not like the medication is gonna, take that thought away or make you so subdued that you forget the thought. So for OCD, I don't find that medication is very effective. You know, I think it does bring you down a level in terms of anxiety, but you still have to do the work. So it's up to you. If you're doing the work, you will recover. I'm telling you, day to day, if you're doing the work, you will recover. So whether during this recovery process you take medication or not, it's only a blimp in time anyways. But the thing is, it does have side effects, and those side effects in a lot of cases can be permanent, depending on the medication you take. So even that blimp in time can cause you problems later down the line in life. So you kind of have to be careful with all of this, and really think for yourself, whether it's the right thing for you. So next question I have is, I'm finding myself becoming more frustrated, nervous, and annoyed by my thoughts, hit and run, like type of OCD thoughts, than being scared. Is this a good sign? Most days are okay, better than it was 2 months ago. But when it's a bad day, it's hard to find strength to keep going. And yes, this is definitely a sign of progress, because when you have OCD that's 10 out of 10, you don't get frustrated and annoyed by the thoughts. You're just in continuous panic mode. It's never ending. When you get to 7 out of 10 OCD, so it's kind of like halfway there pretty much, you start to see that I am recovering, but you're not quite there. And that process is, I mean, I hear this all the time, that people get annoyed with it, right? That it's like, come on, I'm doing the right thing. I just, I'm almost there. But it's, at this point, it's repetition that you have to really catch yourself on the thoughts. So the thought comes into your mind, immediately you are disregarding it. You're not waiting 2 hours doing reassurance and then disregarding it. Because again, either way, you're disregarding it. But this way, you are not taking a step back in terms of recovery, so you'll recover faster. And so this is definitely a good thing. It means that your anxiety is going down, but push yourself to the next level by shortening that time between when the thought comes into your mind and by the time you actively refuse to pay attention to it. So the next question I have is, it's actually a few questions. Can OCD cause all-day racing thoughts and make you feel weird and out of it? Yes, it can, because when you are having thoughts all day long, it's kind of like you're floating between two universes. On one side, you are so focused on OCD that you're not focused on real life. And on the other side, you have to kind of be focused on real life. So you're kind of floating in between the two, but more about OCD. And it does make you feel out of it because you're not focusing on actual reality. You're focusing on the thoughts. As you start to pull out of that, that will go away. So the next part of the questions is also, can OCD cause all-day intrusive memories? Not bad or good memories, just random memories that come out of nowhere. It can. It can, but are you reacting with fear to them? Because if they can come in, right? There are different thoughts come into your mind, obviously. But why do they still continue to come in is because you must be reacting to them. So if you're reacting to them like, oh, again, I don't want it, this is bothering me, again, you're showing that reaction that like if it's a reaction of fear, it will come back, even though the thought is not actually good or bad or scary or anything. But if you're showing that reaction that you don't want it, it kind of has the reverse effect a lot of the time. So just try to be neutral about it and not react, and then it will stop doing that. Another question is, can OCD make you feel confused over whether a dream really happening or just being a dream? Yeah, the dream thing is very, very common because people who have OCD, I find, maybe not all of them, but most people who have OCD have a very active imagination and they can imagine things very easily compared to the rest of the population. So in terms of dreams, because your mind is still active and to an extent, right? And your mind is still a lot of the time trying to solve OCD situations even in your dreams. Because if you think about something 24 hours a day, it makes logical sense that in the dream you're also going to be dealing with same type of issues. Not all the time, but at least from time to time. And I find that when a person is too tired, too worn out, that can especially trigger this type of thing. Also, if the person is not going to bed at normal times as well, that can trigger it. So yeah, I've seen this happen to quite a few clients. So there's nothing really special here in terms of it being different. This is kind of how OCD goes, not for everybody, but for some people. So the next question is, can you give us all or pretty much the recorded symptoms of OCD, the common ones and the uncommon ones as well? For example, anxiety, depression, and so on. I think it would probably be best to do a video and actually spend time thinking about all of the symptoms. But just for answering the question right now, I can tell you that OCD is an anxiety disorder. So all of the symptoms of anxiety apply here. Um, Feeling like the thought is real, feeling like you're a bad person, feeling like it could be true, feeling guilty, feeling ashamed, feeling like you don't want to be around people, feeling like you need to solve it, like you need to figure it out, like if it's a feeling like it's a life or death situation, feeling also feeling depressed because you are stuck with OCD and um, kind of it almost mimics depression. It's not actually like clinical depression, right? But you feel depressed because of the situation that you're in. Um, there is not a lot of uncommon OCD symptoms. They all are pretty much the same, no matter what kind of theme you have. So if the theme has to do with you doing something wrong, which is like harm OCD or whatever, right? Like that kind of a situation, then it will give you feelings of guilt and feelings of shame. It can also actually trigger feelings of anger towards others in terms of, I just want to have this thought figured out. I'm trying to solve it, and this person is talking and they're bothering me. In like a family setting, right, where you're trying to figure out a thought and somebody else is kind of interrupting your thought process. Also, feeling like you need to get away, you need to like have a space where you can think about OCD stuff. So all of those things are pretty much standard OCD stuff that really most people experience, and all of those things, they're not valid, so you have to fight against all of them. So if you're feeling guilty, say, yeah, I'm feeling guilty, but that's just because I have OCD. I'm not buying this guilt. It's coming to me, but I'm not buying it. I feel like I need to get away in order to think of the thoughts. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay with it, whatever group of people you're with, and kind of refuse trying to analyze. And the analyzing, the solving, and the doubting is really the three things that are the most common, with OCD. That the person is afraid, that they feel like they're in danger, they want to figure out if they're really in danger. The more the person follows these behaviors of trying to figure it out, the worse the person gets. And that's kind of how OCD develops. This is just in short. I will have a separate video going into detail on these thoughts. So the next question I have is, can overanalyzing something you did in the past cause OCD thoughts? What I mean by that is, for example, someone could have a thought of something they did in the past and be like, the person says, for example, that might have been a bit gay, and then all of a sudden develop HOCD along with the false attraction and so on. And yes, that could definitely happen. Usually what happens with OCD is it's whatever the person is worried about the most, for being gay, like these thoughts of what if I'm gay, like HOCD, it's not actually most of the time being gay that worries the person. It's what would others say if it turned out that I was gay? How would my life change, or my life would change in this and this and this way? And that's what the person starts to worry. Like, that's the underlying fear. The fear is, what if I'm gay? But the underlying fear that makes this thought continue is the consequences of how would I, live my life and all of this kind of stuff. What would, say, my parents say, or what would other people say? And a lot of the times I see people who have HOCD who are um, coming from a situation where it would be very inappropriate in terms of the family's eyes to be gay, right? And that's what really triggers them. So the next comment they have is, your podcasts are great and your techniques are very useful. I don't agree, however, that medication doesn't do much. SSRIs can make a tremendous difference in recovery and they should definitely be an option. I struggled for 8 years while in therapy, and then upon starting medication combined with therapy, almost all my symptoms were gone within 6 months. I do agree with you that even with medication, one does need to do the work though. So, and you can see here, right, that different people, different situations. I'm not against medication. I was when I first recovered, just because of the side effects that I experienced. But, I mean, it's as long as you're doing the work and you're putting the work as your, say, 90% of recovery is because you're doing the work, you know, take medication, not take medication. This is a temporary solution. If your doctor tells you that here's some medication, you will have to be on this for the rest of your life because OCD is not treatable or not curable or whatever, this is your clue to get a new doctor if your doctor tells you that. But if, just like this person wrote to me, right, if you're doing the work, if you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing in terms of disregarding, not paying attention, switching how your mind works, and on top of it you're taking medication, go for it. But again, research the side effects. So next question I have is, hi Ali, can you talk about reassurance and thinking, please? And okay, whenever you're thinking about your OCD theme, this is automatically reassurance. You're trying to solve it, you're trying to figure it out, or in another way, maybe you're just thinking of the situation and how bad it is that you're having to deal with these thoughts, right? Either way, you're sending a negative thing to your mind, a negative signal to your mind. So you shouldn't be doing that. So whenever you have an OCD theme, whatever that theme may be, it's off limits. You're not thinking about it, you're not trying to solve it, you're not looking online, you're not doing any of that. So really, it's between reassurance and just thinking, there's not a lot of difference most of the time. So, because really, if you didn't have OCD, you would never think of this, right? So, I mean, or most of the time you wouldn't think of this anyways, right? So there's no reason to give any attention to these thoughts. And the more attention you give them in whatever way, even if it's not thinking specifically for reassurance or trying to figure it out, but just thinking that, I hate being in this position and having these thoughts and all of that is sending a signal to your mind that this thought is important, and this will keep your OCD going and keep these thoughts coming back. So any thought you have is off limits, and you can kind of look at everything as reassurance in terms of if it has to do with your thought, it's reassurance, because most of the time the person is trying to figure out if they're in danger or not. So next question I have is, hi Ali, I have been doing what I need to recover from OCD, but every time I get a thought, I will say something out loud or in my head, or like a kind of word to stop the thought. Is this stopping me from recovering, and how can I stop doing this? Well, I think that there's stages in recovery, and if you are a 10 out of 10 OCD, it's hard to just drop the thought. You have to label it as something, like, so say, just label it as OCD and then move on, or say, this is just OCD, I'm moving on. You need that. It is reassurance in a way, but without it, you won't be able to just let go. If everybody could just let go of the thoughts, we wouldn't have OCD issues, right? So I think in the beginning you do need something. So I think it's fine as long as you're not doing it excessively where it's, it starts to create a problem of its own where you're doing it a million times after each situation, right? If you are just labeling it and moving on, that's fine. This will fall away as your anxiety gets lower. So when your anxiety gets to say 5 out of 10 OCD, then you can start working on dropping this part as well. So it will come in time, but just keep an eye on it, make sure that it doesn't become an extreme compulsion in itself. So the next question I have is it common for OCD themes to switch? It seems like as soon as they get over one theme or worry, another one pops up and then back to square one. Is there a point of recovery where you're no longer triggered by new themes? So usually, even though the themes are switching, there's a certain number of themes, or they have a certain underlying element that's the same for all of them. Really, as you are getting closer to recovery, you will get more thoughts, but the anxiety overall will be less. So you'll just be going from thought to thought to thought very quickly, but also they're going to be going away very quickly. So yeah, it is normal. It's part of the process, because if you are paying a lot of attention to one thought, it won't switch. You'll just have one thought that you're always dealing with, because you're giving it a lot of energy. So for your mind, because your mind is not attached to a thought, it's attached to anxiety. So because you're putting so much anxiety into one thought, it doesn't need to send you another. So if your thoughts are switching, that's actually not a bad thing. So, and it will stop once you are further along in terms of recovery. And then the second question is any tips for dealing with OCD and anxiety during the holidays? I put a lot of pressure on myself to feel better or to fake feeling okay for my family. I don't want to ruin their holiday. So with that, I have a whole video coming up on that. But in short, never expect yourself to feel perfect on the holidays. Don't make a thing out of it that, Christmas is coming up, I have to feel good by Christmas, or what's going to happen. Because right now, like how you're wording the question, right, that you're putting pressure on yourself. And the more pressure you put on yourself, the more your mind will start coming up with thoughts, because again, you're sending the signal of fear. So instead, before, say, you're going out to your friends or family's house for dinner, right? For the holidays, kind of putting it in your mind that I'm going to feel how I'm going to feel. Maybe it won't be perfect. I will get OCD thoughts. When I do, I will refuse to pay attention to them. I will refuse to react. I will try to make the best of it. And in terms of ruining their holiday, don't bring up OCD. I say this in all my videos. It never helps. If they bring it up, try to divert the topic to something else. Because it will become reassurance and everybody's going to have a bad time. So just say, yeah, it's fine, whatever, even if it's not. And it will kind of feel a little bit like you're faking it, but this is actually a very good exposure, because you're going to be exposed to the thoughts, but you're going to refuse the reaction, and try to focus as much as you can on the actual holidays. So, but never put pressure on yourself. That's the number one thing, because the more pressure you put on yourself, the worse you will feel. Approach it more like, this is just a day. I'm going to be fine. Next year is going to be better because I'm working on my recovery and I'm going to make the best of it. So this is the end of the show. I know I didn't get to all the questions. I will get to them next week. If you guys have any questions, please post them below this video or any of the videos. I kind of get them all in bulk on the back end of YouTube. And or you can email me to info@youhaveocd.com. Also, please visit youhaveocd.com for more information. There's a private recovery program that's one-on-one talking with me. There's also ebooks, there's articles, there's a lot of information to help you recover, so please check that out. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.